My name is Brent Blake, pastor of Anchor Church, and I want to personally thank you for checking out the Anchor Church podcast. We invite you to download the Anchor Church app that you can find in the Apple App Store and the Google App Store. There you can find information of our upcoming events, different things that are happening in our community, and hear more relevant messages from our team. Thanks so much, and we pray that this message is a blessing to you.
I'm Brent, I'm the lead pastor here, and we want to thank you for being with us today. We are so excited that you're with us, and we're just excited what God is doing here at Anchor. And I was just down in the kids' wing and seeing kids play, and some of them cry, and all the fun stuff that's going on. It's just exciting, and we're grateful that you're here with us. So I want to get into our talk this morning, and we've been in a series titled The Good News About Grace, and we have been talking about the grace of God and why we need it. And part of our vision is we want to be a church that is led by grace. We want to walk in grace. And we believe God's commissioned us as people to be people of grace, people of hope, people of peace in our communities. And so this morning we've been in that teaching, and we've been talking, and we've been going through this series and learning, how do we walk in grace? How do we proclaim the good news of the gospel, and what does that mean in our lives? And so we started a little over 4 weeks ago, back on Launch Sunday, we started this series, and we talked about how grace restores us and brings us mercy, and how do we live under grace. And this morning I want to continue on, and we are going to be in the book of Acts. So if you have your Bible, turn to the book of Acts. If you have a digital Bible, click your screen on, whatever you want to do. If you don't have a Bible, download our app, and we have a Bible built into it, and you can follow along with us. But we are continuing this series today. And as I shared a few weeks back, I talked about how grace restores us, and how it realigns us, and how it rebuilds us. And because of the love of the Father, we're built up. And this morning, I want to continue that thought all the way back from week 1. And I want to dive into this, because most of us like to get to the end, but we don't like the process. It's like building a cabinet from IKEA. Has anyone ever built anything from IKEA? It is the worst experience of your life. We just want the janky dresser built, but it's like, it literally is following directions from another country. Like, it doesn't make sense, and you lose pieces, and you get to the end, and you're like, what are these screws for? And you throw them out, and then you find out a year later that the drawer of the dresser is falling out because you threw away some screws. I've never been there. Like, I'm not speaking from experience or anything. But we don't like the process, and this morning I want to talk about that process a little bit, because it can be long, it can be painful, and we just want to get to the end. And I see so many Christians, so many people just trying to get to the end of the race. And the end of the race is good, but sometimes we can blitz through the process and what God's trying to speak and teach and use us just to get to the end result. And so this morning I want to talk about that. And as I was getting ready for this series, this last week was bulk pickup in Sylvania. If you live in Sylvania, it's when you drive down the roads, it's like twice a year where people have mounds of trash just piled everywhere. And I love it. I think, and not because I'm a trash picker, but because I like to watch the trash pickers. I mean, these people defy physics. Like, I was in my office the other day, and I'm like yelling to Lauren, like, Lauren, Seth, get up here, look at this truck. I mean, I don't know how they get down the street, let alone in Sylvania, because our police are everywhere, how they don't get pulled over. Like, these people will it's like Beverly Hillbillies to the max, like mounds piled up in their trucks. And I love to watch it, because, like, I'll just throw stuff out there for fun to see, like, will they take it or won't they? Like, whatever. And so I'll run through the basement and find the most random object, and someone will take it, and I'll be like, what are they going to do with that? Like, it's 4 pipes with mouse poop in it. Like, what are you doing with that? And but I love watching the trash pickers, because trash picking's unique. My mom was a trash picker, and I hated it. It'd be so embarrassing. We'd be driving down the road, and she's like throwing like all these old, and you're like with your friends in the car. Anybody have a trash picker parent? Yeah, you're like have your friends in the car, and they're like throwing in like nasty, like, and you're like, oh, Mom, please don't stop. Like, you drive down and you see stuff on the side of the road, and you're like, God, if you're real, my mom will drive past this. And sure enough, my mom was a bus driver, and she'd probably get fired for it if they found out, but she would straight up stop her bus and load trash into her bus and then like swing by the house and drop it off. And I'm like, Mom, this is so embarrassing. Like, I don't want to bring my friends over. Like, when it was bulk pickup time, I'm like, no. Like, no one's allowed at our house because there's going to be a mountain of trash sitting outside the garage. But trash pickers are unique. They find treasure in what everybody else discards. And to my wife's credit, we have like pallet board things in our house, and she's like Pinterest central. Pinterest has made trash picking cool, is what's happened. Some of y'all know what I'm talking about. You're like, if I have to build another pallet project, I'm gonna like beat my head through a wall. And I'll literally avoid pallets on the side of the road because Lauren will be like, oh, we can build a coffee table out of that. And I'm like, no. Like, let's go to IKEA and get the janky coffee table. Like, I don't want a pallet coffee table. But Pinterest has made it cool. And there's things in our house that people come in and they're like, oh, that's so beautiful. And I'm like, it's made out of a dirty old pallet. What are you talking about? She slapped white paint on it and like made it look like Joanna Gaines. But there's a uniqueness to trash picking because you take something that everyone else has discarded, that said is useless, and you turn it into something beautiful because there's a process to it. There's something that goes through rebuilding it and seeing value in the waste. And this morning I want to talk about this concept. I want to talk about this idea. And I want to be in Acts 7 because there's a man named Stephen who preaches the only sermon we have on record. Because immediately afterward he's stoned. Like, that's a pretty intense, like, you better preach a good sermon if that's your last one, only record you have in the Bible. He preaches this sermon, and immediately following it, he's stoned to death because of it. And most of his sermon is based around Moses. And this morning I want to talk about Moses because Moses is someone who lived a life that we look back on, and there's movies made on him, right? If you've grown up around church, everyone's seen the Charlton Heston Moses movie, right? Like, let my people go, and the water's shooting. And if you've seen Bruce Almighty, right? We got soup partying, and Moses is talked about over and over and over again. And he's the father of the Old Testament. And he's somebody that literally ended his life extraordinary. And he never even got to the prize. And when we look back at Moses' life, we think of this great man of God. But if we really look at his life, we don't know much about his childhood. Other than the basket down the river, there's this whole period of his life that wasn't even recorded, that most would say isn't even extraordinary. But we like to focus on the end. And so this morning, I want to talk about the process. And so in Acts chapter 7, verse 20, hang with me. We're going to read a lot real quick, and then we're going to dive into it. This is what it says. You can follow along on the screens. At that time, Moses was born, and he was no ordinary child. For 3 months, he was cared for in his father's house. When he was placed outside, so Moses lived in his home for 3 months, and we're going to get into this. It says he was placed outside. His parents hid him in a basket, floated him down the Nile River. And it says he was placed outside, and Pharaoh's daughter took him in and brought him up as her own son. Moses was educated in all the wisdom of the Egyptians and was powerful in speech and education. Now, this is interesting because if you read Exodus, it says Moses had a speech impediment. He had a hard time talking. So Stephen says he was powerful in speech, but if we read Exodus, he had this problem. He didn't like public speaking, and some of you guys can relate to that. You get up, Seth, who's our intern, like if I put him up here, he'd freak out right now. Like that is not his gift, right? But he has other gifts. But Moses in Exodus said he has a speech impediment. So what we take from that is it says he was well educated. So when he spoke, people listened. He was the prince of Egypt. He was in Pharaoh's house. And how many of you know when your dad's the big guns, people listen to you, right? It doesn't matter. If you walk in, if you're the principal of this school and your son, if his son came in here, we'd listen because we know who his dad is. And so it says he was powerful in speech, meaning he had authority. Verse 23, when Moses was 40 years old, he decided to visit his fellow Israelites. He saw one of them was being mistreated by an Egyptian, so he went to his defense and avenged him by killing the Egyptian. Moses thought his own people would realize that God was using him to rescue them, but they did not. Anybody ever done something with good intentions? Like you thought, man, like you clean the house for your wife, or you reorganize the kitchen and your wife comes home and says, what the heck did you do to my kitchen? And you're like, I thought I was helping you. No, only me. Okay. All right. So it said he had good intentions, but the people did not care. And so the next day, Moses came upon 2 Israelites who were fighting. He tried to reconcile them by saying, men, you are brothers. Why do you want to hurt each other? But the man who was mistreating the other pushed Moses aside and said, who made you ruler and judge over us? Do you want to kill me as you have killed the Egyptians yesterday? When Moses heard this, he fled to Midian and he settled as a foreigner and had 2 sons. After 40 years had passed, an angel appeared in Moses in the flames of the burning bush in the desert near Mount Sinai. And when he saw this, he was amazed at the sight. And as he went over to look more closely, he heard the voice of the Lord. I am the God of your fathers, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Moses trembled with fear and did not dare to look. When the Lord said to him, take off your sandals, this place where you are standing is holy ground. I have indeed seen the oppression of my people in Egypt, and I have heard the groaning that has come down to set them free. Now come, I will send you back to Egypt. This is the same Moses who they rejected with the words, who made you ruler and judge? He was sent to be the ruler and deliverer by God himself, though the angel who appeared to him from the bush. He led them out of Egypt and did wonders and miraculous signs in Egypt, at the Red Sea, and for 40 years in the desert. So we have Moses, we have this son, and he goes and he lives this extraordinary life. God speaks to him through a bush. How many of you would say, man, I wish God would show up in my gardening? Like, I wish God would just speak to me through a bush. It would make things so much easier. And God sends him to rescue his people and literally takes the slave force out of Egypt and into the promised land. Well, into the desert before the promised land. And so we have this life being lived. And if we were to look at Moses, he would not be the likely candidate to be the rescuer of Egypt. He wouldn't be the likely choice to be sent to deliver his people. You're sending a murderer back into the country where you murdered someone to rescue the people out. But here's the first thing that I want us to look at this morning. If you're taking notes, you don't have to, your life isn't determined on how you start the race. It doesn't matter how you start. You don't have to finish like that. It doesn't matter how you start things. God can see a purpose and a practice in the process. And if you've ever been through that, you're not defined by your starting point. Moses, in all accounts, should have died as a baby. I used to work for a nonprofit in Uganda, which the Nile runs through Uganda, and I remember going out on the Nile for the first time. And literally it is the most terrifying thing of your life. Like ginormous hippos, which everybody's like, oh, a hippo's so cute. No. A hippo like that is right next to you and you're in a janky boat. That is not peaceful. Like it is not a cuddly hippo. That thing will eat you in one bite. And crocodiles, and there's waves and waterfalls. And the Nile isn't just some peaceful, it isn't like the Maumee River just floating through Toledo, nice and brown, looking all glorious. It is a dangerous river. And Moses should have been dead as a baby. Pharaoh found out that there was going to be a deliverer. And he said, I'm going to kill all the firstborn Jews. And Moses was a firstborn Jew, so his parents said, we're going to save our son. They put him in a basket, and they let him float down the Nile River. And it said somehow he survives the journey, and of all places, he ends up in the house of the man that wanted to murder him. Pharaoh's house. And by the grace of God, by the hand of God in all reality, Pharaoh's daughter finds Moses and rescues him up out of the basket. Now let me tell you, if Pharaoh would have found out who Moses was, he would have been dead. But it says his daughter kept from him where this child came from. And even to the extent that she hires Moses' mother unknowingly to come and care for the baby in the palace. And so you have this child that should have been dead, that should have been trash, that should have been discarded, that should have been put out. He is not the likely candidate for the savior of the Hebrews. And if we're thinking of this story and we're looking at it, he should have been out before it even began. See, some of you have bought into the lie that your life can't be extraordinary because you've had rough beginnings. You've been through some things. You've experienced some trials. Maybe you've made some mistakes and you've counted yourself out of the race before you've even began. And I'm here to tell you that God takes people that everyone else says is trash, that everyone else says is a mistake, that everyone else says is screwed up, and he turns it into something amazing. I've seen it in my own life. As maybe you can tell or maybe not, I am extremely ADD, like all the way to the max. Like if there was a bunny hopping through here, I'd stop and watch the bunny hop through the room and be like, oh yeah, I have to preach. But I am ADHD. I had counselors tell me like, this kid's never gonna graduate high school. He's let alone go to college. Like I could not sit still in class. I'm like tapping on things, playing the drums. I'm like, my teachers hated me. My third grade teacher thought I was the devil, I'm convinced. Literally, like I would be like army crawling through the room. And every day, my son started kindergarten this year, and I remember like crying. Like, I'll admit I cried, it's okay. I'm tough. I got tattoos. But I cried, and not because he was leaving and going away to school, but I was like, God, please don't let him be a bad kid in class. And my wife was like, why are you crying right now? I'm like, I just want him to be good. And it was because of my childhood. I should have been the one that didn't go to college, and I went to college. First one in my family. And then I went on and got my master's. And let me tell you, you're not defined by the mistakes or the setbacks you have in your life. And this is the first truth we get from the story of Moses. Because if you're going to learn to walk in grace, if you're going to learn to live a life of good news, you can't be defined by your past. And I see too many Christians walking around saying, God, send somebody else. God, send somebody else. I can't talk good, right? This is Moses' lament at the bush. I can't talk good. Do you know, I can't go back to those people. And we count ourselves out before we even begin. But the good news about grace is that God is taking people like Moses, and he doesn't just determine their future because of their past. He says, I find value in it. I find value in what other people count as rubbish. See, maybe your life hasn't looked like everyone else's. See, we love to do the comparison game. We like to say, well, I don't have a testimony like him. I don't have their testimony. I don't have their story. Like their story's powerful. Look at the things they've been through. And we compare ourselves. But here's the thing. Maybe your life hasn't looked like everyone else's because God's preparing you to do something far greater than everyone else. Maybe your testimony is going to be far greater than everyone else, and it starts in humble beginnings. It starts in a basket in the Nile River, living in the house of the person that wanted to kill you. And so the story continues on in verse 23. I want to go back. It says, when Moses was 40 years old, so we don't hear about anything else from Moses' childhood until he's 40. That's a big gap. That's a long time. It says when Moses was 40 years old, he decided to visit his Israelites. So somewhere along the journey, he finds out he's a Hebrew, probably because he looked a little different than the Egyptians. And so you start asking questions like, you know, like me growing up, my stepdad had red hair. Well, I don't have red hair at all. I don't even have a lot of freckles. And I'm like, well, I don't look like any of my siblings. Like, what's that about? And so Moses finds out he's a Hebrew. And it says when he was 40 years old, he decided to visit his fellow Israelites. He saw one of them being mistreated by the Egyptians, so he went to his defense and avenged him by killing the Egyptian. It's a bit extreme to prove a point. Moses thought that his own people would realize that God was using him to rescue him, but they did not. The next day he came upon two Israelites who were fighting. He tried to reconcile them, But the man who was mistreating the other pushed Moses aside and said, "Who made you ruler and judge over us? Do you want to kill me as you've killed the Egyptians yesterday?" Here's the second truth this morning, is that the mistakes you made, the failures you've had, the things with good intentions where maybe you messed up, are not written in stone in your life. See, God, because of grace, says, I'm going to take what you consider written in stone, the failures you have, and I'm going to wipe it clean. The cross has already paid for it. And how many times do we know what grace is? Do we know that Jesus has already paid the price? Yet we want to haul the baggage around with us. We want to say, I know I'm forgiven, but this is my luggage I have to carry around my whole life. I'm just going to carry this with me. And we don't release it to God. And this is Moses. Moses is in this place. And he says he fled to Midian. He ran away. And how many of us live our life running instead of facing on our past? I mean, I look back at my childhood and man, we'd break stuff in the house and I'd run. I'd be like, I'm in the woods all day, see ya. Mom will forget by the time I get back. I remember being a teenager and we went on a youth trip and we didn't have anything to do at the hotel at like 12:30 at night. And there was a train track running behind the hotel. And so we said, we have all these rocks and a train going down the track. Let's throw rocks at a train. And we're just pelting the train with rocks. And that's all good and fun, but when your mom is the bus driver on the trip, like, you don't get away with anything. Like, I would always get yelled at for stuff, and we're throwing rocks. All of a sudden, the police show up. So what do? We run. And I literally ran into the room, ran into the bathroom, and hopped in the bathtub with all my clothes. And I'm like, I'm taking a bath. And my youth pastor came in. He knew what was up. He came in and said, Brent, get the heck. And I was like, no, I'm in the bath. And then all of a sudden, I heard it, right? Mom came in. She's screaming, Brent, Michael. And I'm like, oh, God, Jesus, help me. Like, help me hide right now. And you try to run from it, and you can hide it. And it says Moses spent 40 years. He hid in the wilderness. It said he settled as an outsider. Running from your problems is never going to hide them. It's never going to solve them. At some point, it catches up with you, and it might take 40 years in the wilderness. And it might take 40 years. I believe Moses thought, well, I've hidden out here. This is where I'm going to live my life. I have 2 children. I'm a shepherd. You know, that's my past, and it'll never catch up with me. And then he stumbles upon the bush. How many times do we settle for the wilderness? When God's saying there's a promise in your future. There's a promise I have for you. Don't settle for this season of life. Don't settle saying you're a failure. And it says Moses goes on and he runs off and he settles in the wilderness. And God's saying, no, I have something better for you. And he gets his attention through a bush. A bush catches on fire and it's not burning and he stumbles upon it. And in that moment, God realigns his purpose. See, don't resent the process, because walking through the process is what leads to an extraordinary life. If you want to live a life that advances the kingdom of heaven, embrace the process. Embrace your testimony. Embrace the things you've been through and say, I'm not going to live in it. There's a difference between living in your past and embracing your past and saying, I am who I am because of what I've walked through, what God has taught me. And I believe Moses in that moment, he kind of faced down his demons. As he looked into the bush and God said, I'm going to send you to release the Hebrews, he had to face some things that he had been running from. And we don't like that part of the journey. We don't want to face what we've walked through. We don't want to face the brokenness. And it says, Moses talked to the bush and God said, I'm going to send you and release my people. It's counter what most of us want. Most of us want God to reveal that it'll all work out okay. Go start a church in Sylvania, right? Well, will people show up, God? And God doesn't answer, right? He just says, go. We want God to reveal the results, but we don't want to trust him in the process. And so often, let me tell you this, church, listen to me. God isn't always going to show you everything will be okay, but he will say, if you walk in faith, trust the process, step out, I will show you the promise. And this is Moses. It doesn't say, he won't kill you. You won't go through hard times. You won't spend 40 years in a desert. But God says, step out in faith. Band, if you want to get ready. It says, step out in faith. Step, and I will show you the process. Because here's the thing. I wonder how many of us stay lost in our past and never trust the process because we feel like it's either a waste or it's been wasted. How often do we feel like, well, I'm too old. I can't lead kids' church. I can't mentor a teenager. I'm old. They don't want to listen to me. I've lost half of my hair. I'm too gray, right? And I can only say that because I got a ton of gray hair all of a sudden. Like I hit 30 and it all just appeared. I'm too old. I'm too broken. This is the one I've heard the most. Well, I just don't know enough about the Bible. I can't lead a connect group. And God says, step and I'll show you. But we want God to show us without stepping out. And let me tell you, if you want to be a person of faith, if you want to be a carrier of good news, if you want to live in the good news of grace and the gospel of Jesus Christ, it takes a level of stepping out and saying, God, I don't know how it's going to end up. I don't know how you're going to come through, but I'm going to step out and I'm going to trust that you're going to take care of me. I don't know how you're going to use my story. I don't even feel adequate enough to lead this, but I'll step out and I'll trust you. I'll trust that you're leading me, because here's the key. Nothing in your life is wasted. Nothing in your life is considered trash by Christ. Romans 8:28 says this, we know all things God works for the good of those who love him, who have been called according to his purposes. Paul writes it out. God works all things for his good. He will take your brokenness and he can turn it into something beautiful. He can take your age and turn it into something beautiful. We have high schoolers in this room. And if you would step out in faith, if you would walk in the promises of God, you'll see your schools changed. But it's going to take you stepping out. It's going to take you stepping out in faith and saying, I don't know what's going to happen to me, but I'm going to be a light carrier. I'm going to be salt in my community. Some of you, God hasn't called you to be the status quo, to just go through your work week and just be the good neighbor in your neighborhood and put the smile on and just go through the motions. God's called you for a purpose, but it takes stepping out in faith. As a community, God's put on our hearts, we don't want to just be another church in Sylvania. Sylvania doesn't need another church. Sylvania doesn't need a church that just shows up, we punch our Sunday morning card, and we move on with our day. And next week we show up and we say, put your money in the bucket, and we'll just keep this thing going, and you can show up next week. No, that's not what we're here for. That's not why God called us to be here. It's not why you're sitting in these seats. You're sitting in these seats because God's called us a church that is going to impact the community, that has people in it that are passionately running toward him, that is bringing other people along with us, that is advancing the kingdom of heaven, not just by what we do from 10 to 11:30 on Sundays, but what we do on Monday through Saturday. It's the heartbeat of this church. You're not here by accident. And I'm here to tell you that because of grace, because of the death of Jesus Christ on the cross, he can take your brokenness. You can be a Moses. You have maybe counted yourself out. You maybe said, well, I'll leave it to the preacher, or I'll leave it to everyone else in the church. And God's saying, step out. I've positioned you right where you're at. Moms, you have the hardest job in the world. My wife is a stay-at-home mom. She raises our kids, and I give her a lot of credit because every day you go through feelings feelings of feeling like I'm not really making an impact. What am I doing? My life feels kind of wasted. You're advancing the next generation. You're advancing the next generation. You're advancing the kingdom in your home. You're raising up future leaders, future disciples of Christ. Don't count your life as wasted. Grandparents, we live in a culture that discards the elderly. We say just shove them in a home or just put them here. You're too old to do this. And God's saying, you're still purposeful to me. I still see value in you. And we are going to be a church that's bi-generational. Don't let all the young people up here fool you. Man, if you're 70 years old and you can shred on the guitar, come shred on the guitar with us. We would love to have you because there's a value in the kingdom of heaven. God doesn't say like, well, it's just up to the young people, or it's just up to the ones that dress trendy, or it's just up to those that, have money. No, there's a value for everybody in the kingdom. It's the good news about grace. The good news is it's not just for the powerful. It's not just for the gifted. There's a purpose for everybody in the kingdom. So this morning, I want to challenge you. Where in your life have you settled? What have you been running from? What has God been pushing you to press into and you're hiding out in the wilderness? What has God been calling you to do? This isn't a pitch to get more volunteers or more people to serve with us. No, this is a pitch for people to start living the life that God's called them to. And it starts with you. It starts with you as a high schooler in your school. It starts with you being obedient and trusting God. It starts with you being a young person in college, in a field that how do you be a person of light in the field that you're stepping out in faith? It starts with you serving every week the community relentlessly. It starts with you being a stay-at-home mom, picking up after your kids and feeling like, what value do you have to the world? What are you doing? God sees value in what the world sees as trash. God's the best trash picker. And He picks everyone up. And it's the beauty of the gospel is He doesn't discard anybody. He says, you belong. There's a seat for you at the table. It's the heart of our church. It's the heart that we pray that you have, not just on Sunday mornings, but Monday through Saturday. That you would be a person of peace in your community. That you would be light. That you would be salt. That you would be advancing the kingdom. It's who we are. It's who we're unapologetically going to be. But I want to encourage you that your life isn't a waste. Your past isn't a waste. God sees value in it. God wants to use your testimony. Let me tell you, I've seen God use my testimony. The most painful parts of my life, the most broken pieces of my life, the things that I've said, God, I don't even want to revisit it. And God says, I'm going to use it to advance my kingdom. Just trust me. Face it on. Don't run from it. Step into it. God's calling you. Let me pray. Heavenly Father, God, I thank you. God, I thank you for who you are. God, I thank you that you're using and advancing the kingdom all around us. God, that you see value in what other people see as wasted. God, I pray that we would learn to be a people that trust you. God, that we would learn to be a people that trust the process, that lean into the process. God, that say, we don't know how it's going to end, but we know that you've called us. And so, God, I pray as a church that we'd step out in faith. God, if there's people in this room that have been running from you, that have heard the cry, that they need to press into you this morning, God, that they need to surrender in their hearts their own will. God, I pray that they, in a moment this morning, that God, that they would just say, God, I trust you. I'm not